The 4-column diagram is a brief intervention that you can use with people who you identify as being in the contemplation stage of change. The tool uses some of the same principles of a motivational interview, in that it's helping the person to weigh up the pros and cons of making a change. It's also really helpful in getting that person to try and understand the reasons behind their alcohol or other drug use. This is what the 4-column diagram looks like. On one side, what you're going to be doing is exploring the good and not so good things of using. For this example, we'll use the word stoned. And then on the other side of the 4-column diagram, you'll be exploring the good and not so good things of not using or being sober. When I'm doing the 4-column diagram with a young person, what I'd like to do is ask the young person what word they would like to use to describe themselves when they're using and when they're not. But for our example today, we'll use the words stoned and sober. Let's have a go at completing a 4-column diagram using a case study that we've prepared of a young person by the name of Robbie. Robbie is a 16-year-old male. You've been asked to see him at school because he's recently been skipping classes and he was caught with cannabis on the school grounds. Some of his teachers comment that Robbie's become increasingly withdrawn over the last couple of months and he seems depressed. It takes you a few meetings with Robbie to develop a relationship, but eventually he tells you that his grandma died earlier that year. Robbie was close with his grandma and lived with her for many years growing up. Robbie tells you that he used to smoke cannabis just on occasion, just for fun, but lately he's been doing it most nights, saying, "I can't sleep without it." Robbie has always been popular at school. He is a bright student and he's talented on the football field. He's also been dating the same girl for the last 12 months. Robbie says he's not sure if he wants to stop smoking cannabis, but he knows he's on a final warning and he will be excluded from school if he's caught again. So using the example of Robbie, let's have a go at completing a 4-column diagram. First, you want to look at the good things about using, or in Robbie's example, the good things about being stoned. This is a really easy place to start because it's non-threatening and the person should be able to identify quite a few things easily about the good things of using. He might say something like, helps him sleep. He might say something like, I do it for fun. It's important to remember when you're completing a 4-column diagram that you want to use the exact words that the person says. Some of the other things Robbie might say is something about the grief related to his grandma, so maybe stops me worrying. And he might even say it's something he can do with his friends. When you're exploring the good things about using, you're wanting to keep it brief. You're not wanting to spend a lot of time here. So once the person's been able to identify a couple of those key points, you want to summarise and then you want to move on to the not so good things about using. So in the example of Robbie, some of the things he might say are problems at school. He might say that he's having trouble keeping up with the rest of his class. When you're doing this with your client, for each example they give you in the not so good things about being stoned, you want to pick it apart and really drill down and explore really specific examples of what kind of problems are going on. Or if there's problems at school, what would happen if that person had to drop out? So you're wanting to spend a lot of time in the not so good things about being stoned. For Robbie, some of the other things he might mention are problems with football. So he might say things like not turning up to practice, for example. And you might even want to explore what other people in his life think about his alcohol or other drug use, because it might be sometimes hard for that young person to identify all the hassles or the problems. So feel free to prompt them when you're going through the not so good things about using. So I would ask him, how does his girlfriend feel about his use? So let's pretend for this example that the girlfriend doesn't like it. Often young people might report problems around money in the acquiring of substances. So he might say, doesn't like the cost of purchasing cannabis. So for Robbie's example, he's been able to identify quite a number of not so good things about being stoned. So what you want to do is summarise that section, and then you want to move over to this side where you start to explore the good and not so good things about being sober. So you start here with the good things. And in our example of Robbie, some of the things he might say are that he stays in school. He might say something like his grades are getting better. In Robbie's example, he might even talk about being able to turn up to football practice on time. He might also identify having more money. And finally, when we're looking at relationships, he might report that he's getting along better with his girlfriend. So you can see in the example of Robbie, he's been able to identify quite a number of good things about not using. Sometimes you might be working with a young person who might find this section or this column difficult to answer. Usually I find it's one of two things. Maybe that young person has concerns around their self-esteem. So thinking about all these really good things for themselves might be actually quite hard. It also could be a person who's been using for quite a long time, and maybe they haven't had any sober life experiences for so long that they don't actually remember or don't even maybe know some of the good things about not using. So that can give you a good indication if they are struggling here to ask some more questions to find out exactly what's going on for them. But for this example, Robbie's been able to identify quite a number of things. So once you summarise those, you move on to the last column. And the last column is the not so good things about being sober. So for our example today, some of the things a person like Robbie might say are, he talked about problems with his sleep. One of the big issues in the case study of Robbie was talking about his grandma and the grief he feels after she's passed away. So maybe that's something that he experiences when he's sober. Additionally, a common response that a lot of young people give in this column is describing that they feel bored when they're sober. So we might pop that one in as well. Okay, so you can see with our 4-column diagram, the young person has been able to identify the pros and cons of using and not using in a way that's not threatening and really easy to understand and follow. It's also really visually appealing. So once we've got the 4 columns completed, what you want to do next is summarise and bring it all together to look at what can you do with this information, or what are the next steps for Robbie. So what I often like to do is to first ask the young person what they think about the tool or the 4-column diagram that they've just completed. And I also like to prompt them and see if they kind of notice any of the columns matching up, or see how some of the columns, might be opposites of each other. So in our example here, you can see that for the good things that Robbie finds about being stoned, they match up exactly with the not so good things about being sober. So over here, he's reporting that it helps him sleep. And then on this side, he's saying problems with my sleep. Similarly, he's saying it's fun. And over here, he's saying I feel bored. And finally, if we look at this one here, stops me worrying about grandma. And over here, feeling sad about grandma. So now we can see that the responses in the good things about being stoned kind of match up and cancel out the not so good things about being sober. So once you've been able to explore how these 2 columns match up, the next step you want to do is talk to the young person about these things here. Well, these things are their problems, or their life problems. These things here are the things that Robbie's having a hard time with. They're the things that are causing him concern or problems in his life. And for each one of these life problems, he's been able to find a drug solution. By describing it this way, you can talk to the young person about their drug solution and frame it in a way that perhaps they have a choice. Perhaps they want to look at a different solution for all their life problems. Because with a drug solution, you start to get all these consequences. And really, it takes that young person away from all these really good things that they might want for themselves or maybe want for their future. So in essence, this would become your treatment plan. These are the underlying issues or the reasons behind why that person might be continuing using. This is the function of their use or the function that it's serving. So I would talk with that young person about going, okay, so what are some of these things that we can work on together and come up with a different way or come up with another way of trying to help you move forward. I'd really encourage you to give the 4-column diagram a go, even if maybe you just start with the good and not so good things of using. And then if that person is really resonating with the tool, maybe then you might want to continue to that other side. But think of it as a work in progress. It's not necessarily something you have to finish in that one session. And also have a think about how you can use it if by the end of that session, that person hasn't decided that now is the time or now they're ready to make a change. Perhaps you could just keep this to the side and maybe you could bring this out and have a look at it and together look at, have any of these things changed? Is there anything you'd like to add to these columns? Is there anything you'd like to take away? And more often than not, the only column that the person is really adding to are the consequences. So maybe they can see then that all this stuff is staying the same, but things are getting worse. And sometimes a visual tool like that can be really powerful as well. So feel free to be flexible with how you might choose to use it with the person you're working with.